I'd like to call the Thursday, September 1st, 2022 Forest Lake Area School Board meeting to order. Member Clerk, please take roll call.
Member Corcoran? Here. Member Kettle?
Here.
Member Landstrom? Here. Member Luther? Here. Member Peterson?
Here.
Member Rayfield?
Here.
Member Tyson's here. All here.
All right, let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This time I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Scheduled, unscheduled visitors.
Yes, for our listening session tonight, we had 2 visitors. We talked about policy 528 and how our staff administer medications to students.
Thank you, Member Tyson. Do we have any green cards? No green cards. We will move on to positive happenings. Anyone? Member Kevin?
I just want to remind everybody that next Thursday, a week from now, on September 8th, is the Tefla Fall event at Waldock Farms in Minot Lakes. It's from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Of course, it's free, but you should all bring your money because everybody's looking for donations. There will be free food sampling for those that don't know by Keys Big Apple Bagel, Brillium, and Domino's Pizza. There'll be live music by Charlie O, from the Music Connection. There'll be a cash bar sponsored by the Old Log Cabin. There'll be a funded grant for an installation and use of a telescope which was generously donated to the high school. We're not talking a small telescope, we're talking large. So. And last but hardly least, on behalf of Tefla, I'd like to thank the board for their donation to Tefla. We did a $500 donation, as you know, and Tefla sent us a thank you letter, which some of you may not have seen. But Tefla's thanking you for that donation. With that, I'm done.
Thank you, Member Kettle. Anyone else?
I went and visited 3 separate buildings yesterday and 4 separate events, so thank you for the welcome speech yesterday and the speaker. He was a great speaker, and we were all there to welcome all the students, well, all the teachers back who are getting their classrooms ready. And then I went to an orientation for elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so they were strategically planned. They were all a different hour, so I was able to make it to all 3 of them. They're all excited for different reasons. And when someone said, wow, you're gonna be, that's so stressful, that's so crazy, I'm like, you know what? It's kind of like an absolutely fabulous buffet because I get 3 buildings and 3 staffs and 3 principals, and it's gonna be a great year.
Wow.
Anyone else? Member Parker?
Just about the teacher welcome back yesterday, I thought it was great. The speaker was great, and it's just nice to see all the everybody's excitement coming back to school in person. And also, I'm excited for the new football coach. The first game's tonight, so hopefully it's going to go well. I talked to Mike Kenny quite a bit about the new coach. They're all really excited for a new person in the role, and hopefully it's going to be a good season for the Rangers.
All Rangers. I was just going to add that Ben Rudroot, got it. He was an awesome speaker. I think if Raji missed it, if you could watch the video, he's amazing. He had so much energy and so many messages about positivity and relationships. It was just inspiring. And I think for me, he was just so genuine up there. I mean, it was just a wonderful event. And I know afterward, the teachers were really raving. Some of them were still like drying tears. I mean, he really had good content, and the delivery was incredible. I loved it. And then, yes, stayed for, roped Jeff into serving lunch to staff, which was fun. Yes, it was really fun to then eat lunch with them and hear how excited they are about starting the new year and being in person. So we're excited to go. And Steve, you had a great message too. You did very nice. And then I just wanted to say that this came in the mail, and all the little kiddos and the families and the moms are excited to have these. And if you know of anybody, I know Julie said she didn't get it, but if you hear of anybody, then let them know so they get back. And then, yep, Tefla, we're looking forward to going, and thank you for all your hard work being on the board, Alex. That's a lot of work. It's a big event, and for getting us all in on that donation all in one month.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Concludes my report.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. We will move on to super workshops and conferences. Anyone? It's a short agenda. We condensed it tonight for maybe strategic reasons, but that's making me feel lost, right? Then we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Massey.
All right, let me see if I can grade the meeting on here. Just first of all, to echo some of the comments already shared, our new teachers came in last week for 3 days of orientation, introduction, and mentoring and readiness for their jobs. They then joined all staff this week, Monday through Thursday. Many will be in tomorrow, which is a contract day. But principals and staff teams have been really busy this week, getting ready for the school year, and everything that was planned for them, to a degree, interferes with their anxiety about getting their classrooms ready. But it's all important work as they get ready for the start of the school year on Tuesday, September 6th. You know that on September 6th, all but 8th graders and 10, 11, 12th graders start on Tuesday. At the middle school, 7th graders get to run the school for a day and become familiar with their lockers and their classrooms and the hallways and the lunch and everything else. So one day to get acclimated. And then the same is true at the high school for 10th graders. For 9th graders with link advisors, web advisors at the middle school who plan orientation, introductory activities for kids. And as already been mentioned, activities are well underway. I think tennis has had 7 or 8 matches already. Soccer is well underway. Volleyball, our first football game of the year is a home game. We're already underway at 7 o'clock. St. Michael Albertville. So we are up and running in so many ways, and again, September 6th, Tuesday, all kids are back and buses are rolling. Speaking of buses, we will have all of our routes running on the first day of school. Not because we have long-term drivers for all of the routes, but we will deploy mechanics and office staff, our subs, and people who said they can't drive, but I'll give you a month. So we're locked in for the first 2 weeks, fully operational. We have bus drivers at tables at all of the open houses, middle school included yesterday evening. Talked to John Gray just before the meeting, and he has 4 or 5 potential applicants with a number of people who took applications from the actual open house. Huge success in even half of those materialize into bus drivers. So we continue to do have a lot of different efforts to recruit bus drivers, and we'll continue to do that with the plan and hope and desire of running all of our buses every day. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that we may be canceling routes at some point. It's a really, really tight job market, as I think we're all aware. Other staffing updates are teaching positions, with a couple of exceptions that we're working on today and tomorrow are all filled. I'll put Ms. Wilson on the spot. We're 6 or 7, 8 or 9 paras short at the moment.
For about 5.
All right, fantastic. On the custodial side, if Ms. Renberg has a quick update there.
Yeah, about 7 short right now.
7 short on the custodial side. You can imagine what that means to our buildings. That means the other custodians are picking up the job and picking up the work, because they're not going to rest if things aren't ready, and they're just going to work and get it done.
Are those full-time positions or part-time split shift, like?
Full-time positions between 2 buildings.
Okay.
But full-time evening.
And then on the bus driver situation, we think it's 10 routes that are currently unfilled with a permanent driver that we are scrapping together the first days and activities of the school. I want to take,
Superintendent, I have one question. What is it from start to beginning to fulfill the bus driver requirement?
depends on what they come in with, if they've
Okay.
driven bus in another district or have their CDL, but it's a 2 to 4 week process.
So that has been shortened up then, like was talked about.
I don't know that we have seen much of what was discussed at the legislature last year enacted.
Okay.
Unfortunately. I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes and provide an update on our safe learning plan related to the start of the year with respect to COVID. Our guideline follows CDC and MDH, and they have significantly loosened their guidance for schools, primarily related to quarantine. The recommendation is still a 5-day quarantine if testing positive, and asking for another 5 days following that when around other people. So that is the recommendation. However, there's a lot less requirement from MDH on testing. Testing is available and encouraged, but we are not, never have actually required tests to stay or tests to come to school. So we are reliant on families and kids testing and reporting that information, and then the health office assistants will provide guidance. With respect to our guidance, again, if an individual, staff member, or student has a positive test, we would recommend 5-day quarantine. The return is symptom-free, 24-hour, symptom-free, 24-hour, fever-free, which is essentially the same as our too ill to go to school guidelines. So in a sense, COVID is now fitting in the category of any other illness that we might have. And our health office assistants are prepared to provide that guidance for staff and for students if parents are seeking that kind of support and guidance. With respect to reporting COVID cases, that too has been loosened by MDH. They asked that we report weekly on a school-by-school basis. So we'll continue to do that, provide those updates for number of staff positive and student positive for those that are reported to us. Those updates are reflected currently on our district website. Thanks to Ms. Reedy, appreciate that. And I think we are good to go with our safety. Any questions?
Does the return to school, do we have any recommendations of mask wearing, or are we staying out of that?
It's recommended. Now, if the student stays home and doesn't inform us that they have had COVID, we wouldn't know
Yes.
that they're returning following COVID because there isn't that requirement that we track that. So that would be based on, that's the recommendation, yes, but we are not, that's not a requirement.
Yep.
Per se.
So is it the same for staff?
Correct.
Correct. And then can I ask one question, just backing up to the staffing? We talked about all the teaching and staff are filled. What about the 6 substitutes, the long-term serving subs? Do we have those in place?
Yeah, thank you for that. The board approved last Friday the daily substitutes at each of the elementaries, along with extending the part-time, less than full-time specialist music by ed, media innovation. So those folks have already been extended, accepted that, completed that, and all of those substitute positions at the elementaries have been hired as well.
Great, thank you.
Good, thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item 7, approve tonight's consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We will move on to 8.1 donations. Member Gettle.
I am pleased, as usual, to say that the gifts to the district this month total $9,013.45. $90.57, 9013.57. We had a $5,416 donation from the Red Line Club, $2,569.57 from the Forest Lake Girls Soccer Boosters, $508 from the Forest View Elementary PTO, $500 from the American Legion Auxiliary Unit 225 for school supplies helping families in need, and $20 from Target Corporation cyber grants to the Lino Lakes Elementary STEM School. Be resolved by the School Board of Independent School District 831 that the school board accept with appreciation those donations and permit their uses designated by their donors.
Second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We have nothing under new business tonight. Review your upcoming calendar dates. And we will move to 11, school board discussion. Dr. Massey, enrollment and housing discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is where I think I'll be successful stretching a meeting out of it. And I'm going to take some time and walk through a lot of data. I shared the slideshow with you before the meeting. I would suggest that you try to look at the data from a holistic standpoint versus item by item, line by line. I want to paint a picture that illustrates where we're at with enrollment, how enrollment, and what's impacting enrollment. And I want to overlay what we might see with respect to current and future housing and the impact that that might have on enrollment in any one of our second elementary schools. So again, that's the picture I'm trying to paint. I use a lot of data from Hazel Reinhardt's enrollment study, and we employed her last year to study housing development. We're working with the city planners and mayors in Lino Lakes, Wyoming, Linwood, Scandia, Columbus to a degree, and Forest Lake, as they have been, obviously from a planning standpoint, looking at their buildable land and what pressure there is for selling large acreage and when that might occur and what impact that may have with zoning requirements on housing. So again, just setting the context. The population in the U.S. and Minnesota is aging. I don't think that surprises any of us. In 2020, 65-year-olds made up 16 to 17%, make up 16 to 17%. A decade earlier, that was just under 13% at 12.9%. And for the first time in the history, our history in Minnesota, 65-year-olds now outpace school-age kids. So the takeaway there is school-age kids across the state, we're seated in our district as well. Frankly, this is a national trend. School-age kids are declining. There are fewer kids living within our district, fewer kids across the state, school-age kids. When you see housing development, you might scratch your head and think, where are the kids? There's got to be a ton of kids. Do we have enough room for kids given the housing development? There aren't a lot of kids coming out of these houses, and we'll see that in just a minute. According to Hazel's statistics, completed fertility is 1.73. That's below replacement, which would be 2.1. And then with respect to kids being born, housing markets, not sure what current interest rates, inflation overall is going to have. It's going to be 5, 6, 7 years out before we see that barrel. Since 2011-12, a decade over the last decade. Forsyth Public School enrollment, excluding early childhood, which has blossomed as a program in our district. That's another conversation we can certainly head on that here, if there's questions on that. Has decreased by 868 kids, or 13%. Largely the result of charter schools, quite honestly. District school age population has decreased by 270 kids, so that's the number of school age kids. 270 students, or 3%. Resident enrollment, excluding again early childhood and ALC, which draws enrollment from not just our district, but surrounding districts, has decreased by 1,000, just over 1,000 students for resident enrollment, or 16% decrease. Non-residents make up 11% of our total enrollment. And interestingly, of the school age kids in our district, we capture 62.2% of those kids. Again, the competition for enrollment is rather fierce in this district. This is our current enrollment, as we are looking to start on September 2nd, next Tuesday, or 6th, next Tuesday. By school, and then by middle school, community school, and high school. In parentheses is enrollment this time last year. So you can see Columbus is up, Forest View down slightly, Forest Lake Elementary about the same, Lima Lakes down slightly, Linwood down slightly, Scandia is up, Wyoming down rather, I don't know about considerably, but it's a noticeable number. Middle school, roughly the same when you're talking about 925 students. Community school, that's a moving target because kids start at different times. And then the high school is up a little bit with respect to the start of last year. Now, when I say down slight, and I say that across a number of schools, and we say that over time, you can see the long-term impact on enrollment. Any thoughts? Any questions?
So just going back to the last slide, I heard you say twice that our early childhood is robust. So it sounds like they start here and then we lose them at some point. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I would draw that conclusion.
Okay.
Yes, some of our early childhood kids may choose to go elsewhere. But by and large, early childhood that starts with us, and our early childhood total number is not exactly our kindergarten number. So, Mr. McKinnon, would you have the ballpark on?
Yeah, I would say that it's makes up, it depends on the school, but it's roughly, maybe it's a half to 2/3. The robust part is that we have expanded early childhood programs into every elementary school and are offering up to 2 sections in some elementary schools. Where we're also notice that there are multiple preschool options for kids to attend that then filter into our schools, and then of course, go into their respective school of choice once they hit kindergarten. But Dr. Massey's correct that the vast majority of the ones that start in our programs do stay in our programs. So those expansions into each of those sites has been a very positive move for the district.
And what we have seen over the last decade is community-based, school-based preschool program, more than we have ever had. So in the last number of years, our program has grown from 1 preschool classroom to, in some cases, 2. The demand is growing and there's an interest. Some communities build center-based preschool programming. If we were to do that at Forest Lake, Scandia might say, we want it at Scandia, we don't want to drag our child into the center when the brother or sister in first or second grade is going to Scandia Elementary. So again, school-based preschooling has been a real boom for us. We bus those kids, so they get to ride the bus with their siblings and go to school along with their siblings.
So what year did all that start? Because I kind of remember when it started, and it started small. Of course, it was only a couple. elementaries, and now that it's in every school. That's impressive. So I just wondered what year that started. Do you remember, Corey, at all?
It was progressive. It was starting to happen prior to my start here, which was in the summer of 2016.
Yeah.
But it was about 2018, I want to say, 19-ish, where we finally were able to check all the boxes.
Okay.
To Dr. Massey's point, if they're going to be going to that school, let's get them in that culture and environment as early as possible.
That was a great decision. I mean, that's amazing. Great decision.
Yeah, it's good for kids, it's good for the school, and it's good for the mom.
Quick question, Superintendent. Now, just looking at the numbers for current enrollment, I'm just curious. I haven't seen these numbers for a while. In fact, I was asking principals yesterday. Do we have any buildings or levels where it's kind of max capacity, or are we good in
I
all of
would
our
say
buildings?
that we are, if you were to walk through any of our elementary schools, you're not gonna see a bunch of empty classrooms. If we weren't center-based or school-based preschool, you would. Maybe 23 classrooms in every school. So we have filled those classrooms with preschool programming. Yet, I know that none of our schools are at complete capacity. So there's room for some growth in some classrooms, there's room for more kids in some of the classrooms, although enrollment is tight in a number of our different classrooms. But we aren't at complete capacity in any of our elementaries. We're not at complete capacity at the high school, we're not at complete capacity at the middle school.
No, thank you.
And then you're probably going to get into your presentation about some of the developments that are going on in the area. That's what you're, okay. Okay, because there's quite a few. Yeah.
Right?
I want to ask a little bit of question, but the capacity, how do we determine the capacity of the classroom? I mean, we're trying to decrease class size, right? I mean, that's the goal, but yet we have a big classroom. How do you determine what capacity is? How would we decide that?
Yeah, the fact is, you could put 35 kids in the first grade classroom.
Right.
Not a good idea. So capacity is not how much room there is, but what's good for instruction. We certainly are committed to lower class sizes in K1 and K1-2. That was actually identified in the 2018 referendum. Lower class size averages with a particular emphasis on K1-2. And then by grades 3-4 and 5-6, class size starts nudging up, and it's more workable there as kids become readers and they're reading for understanding the content versus learning how to read. So certainly critical in the younger grades have lower class sizes.
So just remember, Keto, my question was more around the capacity of the building itself. But that was, I just want to clarify that.
By 2031, 32, now we're taking where we're at today and looking into the future. Our school enrollment is projected to range from 5499 to 57. Right now we're at about 5,800, or 5% to just under or almost flat enrollment. So we're just under 5,800 currently with enrollment. Kindergarten is projected to be smaller than the previous year. Previous year's graduating programs. So we graduate a larger number of seniors and bring in fewer kindergartners. You can see that effectively. Net migration is projected to be positive. Migration being kids we lose to other schools or other districts, and on the flip side, kids that we gain from other communities and other districts. That is expected to be on the positive side. For the next 5 years or so, K-5 enrollment is projected to be 37 students larger than 84. Pretty nominal. Overall growth in our K-5, K-6 program. Projected kindergarten classes are affected by a projected smaller number of births in the next several years. Middle school enrollment is projected to increase just marginally, and the high school, we believe, will begin to decline upwards to potentially 100 kids a year. Again, we bring in fewer kindergartners, you're going to see fewer kids in the high school. This is enrollment over the last 10 years. 66, 59 in 11, 12 to 57, 91 the previous year. Total enrollment decrease over this last decade, 13%. Non-resident enrollment is 11% of our total enrollment. So that's open enrollment, because they don't live in our district but attend our schools. This is actually an increase over the last decade of 4%. That's a really positive sign for us. Again, the loss of district enrollment when charter schools are expanding is going to have a negative effect on our overall migration into our district or capturing our own resident kids. At this point, I believe that the charter schools, Leela and North Lakes, are at their capacity, if you will. I don't think they're not aware of plans to expand either of those programs. You'll recall 3 years ago, North Lakes Academy built a whole new school and added grades K1, 2, 3 to join the 4, 5, 6 program. So that had an immediate impact as we lost 20, 25 kids in each of those grade levels.
Very good question. On the 11%, do we, and you may have it down further in the slides, but do we know or have a feel for where that 11% is going? I mean, is it primarily the high school? How does that break down?
So 11% of enrollment, non-resident enrollment is coming in.
Right.
We get more enrollment from the north, generally, and we lose one more to the south. So by way of where people work, people from the north drive through Forest Lake, choose Forest Lake as an option. Families who live in Land Lakes choose Centennial as their parents are driving to the south. I think there's some opportunity there, quite honestly, for capturing enrollment. Centennial doesn't offer immersion, where they offer STEM, so I think there's an opportunity. Okay, the numbers are getting a bit small, but you can see here enrollment lost to non-public and homeschool each year. So the loss of where does migration now go? Traditional non-public schools, homeschool, and then traditional non-public is going to be your charters, and then homeschool. Homeschooling has increased a bit over time, and then you can see the in 2019 and then 2021, the movement out to charters that coincided with North Lakes Academy expanding the elementary school. But there's fewer kids today than 10 years ago attending traditional. You know, I need to correct myself. Traditional non-public is going to be private, not the charters. There's a much bigger number of our kids going to charter schools. So that's going to
So Jim Grace.
Pardon me?
Yeah, those are the Totino Grace and St. Pete's.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah, yes. And Dr. Mass, again, where I was trying to work on the homeschool part, as far as giving into like Jason High School classes and different things, is that continually being looked at?
Every time we get a request for homeschool, we have a conversation at the school level with, are there part-time options at the middle school and high school, are there classes you would like to take as a homeschool?
Is it given partially in the schools? How does that affect funding? Is that something?
If they're half-time us, we get half-time funding.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is just a layout over time of the number of school-age kids that live in the Forest Lake community. Attending non-public, attending other public options, or public options in general. Again, our capture rate is 62%. It's interesting when you look at the Minnesota average for non-public, 67%. We lose half of that to private. In close proximity to Forest Lake, yet our homeschool number is greater than the state average. So then this would be the public option, open enrollment out, open enrollment in. You can see the loss there overall with a greater number of enrollment out, charter schools included, versus open enrollment in. You can see the open enrollment in, as I mentioned before, the increase in migration. You can see this past year, the number of kids that we brought in open enrollment exceeds the number that we brought in 10 years ago. Take a look at the statistics on the right. State open enrollment average is 8.7. Open enrollment in, open enrollment out, you can see a percentage there on the state level or the state average. Forest Lake area schools attending charter schools compared to the state average. Again, most school districts don't have two fairly large charter schools in the middle of their district. Kindergarten projection over time. You can see here the declining number of kindergartens. I would point to the note on the right there. We're currently at 341 kindergartens. We're projected, based on Hazel Reinhardt's analysis, to be about 400. So we have been tracking a fairly low kindergarten number as we move to the start of the school year. Overall, we're about 60 students off of where we started last year, but the kindergarten number is pretty significant part of that. So elementary projections without housing consideration, you can see that, there's, if you look at just any one school, you would see it being somewhat stable, but over time, if you look at most of our elementary schools, you're going to see fewer kids in 23-24 than we had in 18-19. So to Member Corcoran's question earlier, there is a lot of opportunity for housing growth in the community. We worked with the city planners and got their data, had direct meetings with them, had robust conversation, provided that data to Hazel. Hazel did her analysis with what we might expect for enrollment based on different housing units. So in particular, we looked at the city of Forest Lake, Hugo, and Lima Lakes. We also did a little bit of analysis up in Wyoming. What you'll find about each of these, Wyoming included now, Forest Lake, Hugo, Lima Lakes, is each of these communities are supported by public utilities. The Metro Musa lines runs right up through the center of Forest Lake, serving public utilities to the city of Forest Lake, the heart of Forest Lake, I should say. Of course, Hugo, Lima Lakes, all the way up into Wyoming as well. Get out to Scandia and Linwood and Columbus, and it's private utilities. You can't get dense housing growth when run private utilities. 1 acre communities probably at best. Scandia has ordinance for most of their open land to be 5 acres. They've had some conversations, doesn't go very far, about shrinking that to 2.5 acres. Remember Rayfield, probably familiar with those conversations at the city council in Scandia.
Yeah, perennial.
Columbus has the same ordinance, 5 acre minimums in most of their area in Columbus. It's part of their heritage, again, driven by private utilities. If you drive down Highway 61 into the heart of Hugo, you see expansive. We've seen that for the last 15 years. It migrates well. Meeting with Brian Bear, he's the city manager in Hugo. They've had a very clear vision and clear strategic plans to grow residential communities along with industry growth in Hugo. They would like to see a freeway interchange just on the northern part of Hugo to continue to feed that area. That's part of their just ambitious growth vision in Hugo. White Bear Lake 15 years ago was aware of that. They circled some land in Hugo, and in one of those circles they put a Nika Elementary. That land was circled long before development came to that area. That circle was there long before they built the school. And then they did another study of the tremendous growth of Hugo and passed at that time $250 million bonding referendum to expand their high school, most of their elementary schools, including Onika, and build another elementary school within a mile and a half of Onika Elementary, all within the northern part of the White Bear Lake School District, to support the residential growth in the northern part of Hugo. They, I think, are banking on getting that first development into Forest Lake District. They get that development, might they get the development next in line to the north? Sort of what happens down in Lino Lakes. Once some of those Lino Lakes families go in Centennial, what do the neighbors do? They follow suit, and that's where they go support. So that is part of the strategy in the northern part of White Bear Lake in Hugo. When you go north from 162nd, 165th out of Hugo and into Forest Lake, there's projected, and that's Hugo, it's in our school district, but it's still Hugo. There are plans, Nika Ridge and others, to build out with the same kind of growth and development that they have in other development to the south. So it's coming into our district. And again, back to inflation and the housing market and interest rates, who knows? A year ago, we thought that might all happen when we wake up in the morning. But today, that's going to slow down, and there are the signs of that. So does that mean it halts? Does it mean it slows down? It's anybody's guess. But they are projected to grow out those housing developments in Hugo all the way up to the border of Forest Lake. Councilmember Husband can probably speak at length about that topic, that I know is a very active topic in Forest Lake City Council, along with housing growth into the, so the Forest Lake then is development from the center of Forest Lake to the south. And I would say at some point in the future, is that 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, you drive down 61 and you don't see farmland, you see just dense housing developments. So that is ultimately potentially pressure on enrollment. There is about a 0.3 to a 0.38 student school age kid in every house that's built, new house. So it's no longer 2 kids per house or 3 kids per house. It's less than 1. It's less than a half. So Hazel factors that into this analysis. So the number, actually a future slide will show how that translates to kids. But these are, over the next 5 years, projected from Foresight, Hugo, and Mountain Lakes, housing unit growth in those communities. Councilmember Husnick has seen these numbers, Foresight housing consideration based on population, households, employment opportunity as well. Population is expected to grow in the next 20 years, 34%, with household growth at 43% in the city of Foresight.
Dr. Massey, anybody see you have a question?
Sorry, on the last slide, the previous slide, the multifamily units, 11 through 44, that takes into account all the new restricted housing builds up and up by the transit station,
Yes.
all of those, that's all of it. Headwaters Landing and all of those, okay.
I think they just put 50 up next to the transit station, and there's another building slated to go next door. They're starting on it.
Yeah, it's almost
Yeah,
done.
those
So those are coming.
apartment buildings are moving, they can't build those fast. You go south from Menards along Everton, there's
Yeah.
2 complex unit going in, one built 2 years ago. I don't know how many residents, we don't get a lot of kids out of those units. Usually singles or couples without kids.
Kids all the time, but there's no.
So then projected K-6 enrollment in the next 5 years, this factors in what we might get from the housing developments that you saw in the previous slide. 48 to 55, I can't read that number, 30 Wyoming, Wyoming community serving Wyoming, Wyoming's serving Columbus, Lino Lakes, Hugo, and the city of Forest. If there's any point of conversation when you're looking at anywhere from 300 to 400 potential school-age kids across our school district. Now, these aren't all elementary kids. The capture rate is 62% again. So the question I think that we have to start thinking about is, what do we do with housing development and the school-age kids that come out of housing development? When does a housing development come into play? How many kids do they produce? This gives us some answers to that question. Where might those kids go? If we keep existing school boundaries, this is where they would go. This is not to suggest, let me be clear, this is not to suggest redistricting enrollment for the district. That is not what I'm suggesting. However, if in the southern part of Foresight, we see the growth in the next decade that is potentially there will be a question of what do we do with that enrollment? Can all that enrollment feed into Foresight? Or does some of that enrollment go to other Lino Lakes, Scandia? So there's a housing development just west of the Village Inn on Viking Boulevard, the old 9-hole golf course up there. That's going to produce 100+ units, I believe, in that area. That would typically be either Columbus or Wyoming Elementary, with, again, limited opportunity for growth in Linwood because of the farmland and private utilities. Does that enrollment in that golf course area go to Linwood? Those are decisions that you make without redistricting boundaries for the district. So you can take housing developments, that's one strategy. Take housing development, circle them, point them to a different school, and where they might go to balance enrollment in our other schools. The other question you might be is, does this growth in the southern part of Forest Lake, much like what Bear saw in Hugo, does it necessitate or drive the conversation about a potential additional school down there? I would submit that probably not today with what we know. Probably not with what we know today. However, I think you can make the case that the growth in Forest Lake happens as we see, or if it's even more robust, would that support school? You might be able to make that argument. Keep in mind that if we're not feeding enrollment to Columbus, Glenwood, Scandia, with limited housing growth opportunity, are those viable schools, or do they become smaller schools that we have to have with kids? That's kind of the balanced question in front of us, none of which drives the decision has to be made today. But I put this in front of you as, I think, a really critical conversation that the board needs to start wrestling with respect to the potential for some housing growth and its impact on the world.
I'm going to ask you a question. Just want to make sure I understand it. So the capture rate is 62%. Was that, and you may not be able to answer, was that incorporated into that
No,
number?
these are just straight numbers out of the house.
Okay.
So with behind that, a capture rate is.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So I mean, when we're looking at this data and thinking about, you know, the potential growth coming from people moving north and our ability to have a place for those students to land, what steps would we want to start taking to start thinking about, because White Bear early on acquired land there, I would see something like process of being ready for those students taking quite a while, right? I mean, it's a 6 to 8 year process minimum, right? And I mean, how do we look at, if we wanted to get started on that, what are some of the steps we could take to do that? Not saying that we would, but we want to be prepared for an eventuality.
Yeah, if we think about it, 10 years from now, there may be a whole different set of people sitting around this table. And they might look at this group and say, they were really smart. They kind of knew where to put housing development, and they kept our schools viable. But if enrollment explodes in Forest Lake, and there's no place to put a school, yet that group says, how come that group 10 years ago wasn't thinking about, because you don't get to tear down houses and build a school.
Right.
That might happen. So, but that's the dilemma, right? You know, should we be circling a plot of land and saying, if the numbers drive it and the data supports it, good news is we got land secured there where we could go to the community and see if they would want to build a school. I think that is that.
Yeah.
Number if you're driving at there.
Yeah, very much.
So what would we do there? We'd have to start entering conversation with the city of Forest Lake. We've had some very theoretical conversations around that, but I certainly don't have authority in my position to enter into a serious conversation there. That would be a decision made by this board, whether or not you want us to start having a conversation. All that land is privately owned today. So there would be a lot of conversation, negotiation, one, where, and then two, who owns that land and how might that work? Are we going to purchase the land opportunity now to secure that? what we sell. There's a lot of things at stake, all of which could be hypothetical, theoretical, yet could, from just a planning standpoint, it doesn't commit the district to anything.
Yeah, and I think my point is that, I'm not saying we go one way or another, I'm just saying that whatever way we go will take a long time. I mean, or, yeah, it will take a long time, there's no other way to say it.
Right. And if we're wrong, then it could cost 10 years.
Member Listener?
Yeah, so I noticed that all the information is looking down 35E, so Hugo. Has there been any look at 35W areas? Because we have our district out to portions of Ham Lake too, right? And there's kids out there, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in Northern Blaine, and one complaint I hear from parents is that there's not enough room in the schools there, that they are taking entire classes and communities and having the kindergartners go to one building, and then they'll put them in a different building for first and second grade, and they've run out of room. So they made a school and it's already full. And they've had a population growth growing northward also that I'm not sure got planned as well as White Bear did. So looking on that side of things, there's quite a few children, I don't know how many, but I'm not positive why it's not in our metric at all. We've got E and W that people could,
You're right.
yeah.
Yeah, we have done quite a bit of conversation with Final Lakes, which would be probably that area most influenced by that area that you're talking about. Our border stops, I mean, Lionel Lakes is right on that border line, so it'd be migration in from the area that you're speaking to. It's hard to factor, that's a harder number to gauge.
And not just saying capture, more that those are gonna get very full communities, and they might start just marching upwards through Lino up into Ham Lake, because Columbus does have the 5-acre rules, but Ham Lake really surrounds Columbus also. That there are a couple bigger developments that are just on the edge that were being built a couple of years ago, and there's more going. And like you said, the recession and building changes will happen, but Blaine is very full, very, very full.
And Anoka, you'll.
And that's Anoka ahead of it,
Just
yeah.
east and
Yep.
north of Lime Lakes Elementary, the new Anoka Elementary School.
Apparently that's full.
Right. Yeah, and there's a big development just to the north of Lime Lakes Elementary with 55 homes.
Yes, they just started, they put one up in like 4 months, it's just appeared.
Is that
Beautiful
14?
development.
Is that 14?
That's part of this calculus.
Member Tyson, had a question?
Well, I just want to go back to what Member Rayfield's question was, and, you know, I think in Forest Lake, we kind of felt that steamroll is coming from White Bear, and I've heard that from colleagues in that district, that, yeah, we're coming your way. But my question is, and kind of going off of what Rob was saying, is it prudent to look at what land is available now? I mean, I think that we're an easy target for charters, and the new early learning center has already dug a hole and they're going up, and, you know, I saw a sold sign went on it and I'm like, ooh, and then I'm like, wow, another, you know, so we're kind of an easy target in this area for people to buy up stuff and want to do a charter and do different things. So I think, you know, Rob said it, you know, it is a slow process, but I think it would be prudent to at least look at what land is available in this area, or that it's kind of the southern end of Forest Lake. What's left? What is there before it's all gone?
Right.
Just to look at that.
So I personally concur with Member Tyson's assessment. I was gonna go around when we got done and ask how people felt about that. And we could do that now, if each member wanted to weigh in on how they felt about directing administration to start having a more prudent conversation around purchasing land for future growth. Because that, as you said, that land's only gonna get far more expensive, and as you said, we're not going to be tearing down houses to build a school in the future. So the acquiring land now, or I shouldn't say now, but in the more near term than when we need it, would both save the district a lot of money should we need it in the future, and should things not pan out that direction, likely be worth a considerable investment at worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario, we would benefit financially from the future sale of that land. Best case scenario, we would be able to put a school there and capture all that enrollment in that area before the land is sold off and developed.
Right. And we're landlocked, or we're
Right.
school locked.
Also, for an update, we are winning 21-14 out there. No, Jim Caldwell, I texted him earlier, just giving me an update.
Is it halftime yet? Is it halftime?
Starts at 7, so.
He didn't say, he just said
Thank
it's,
you. It's only 8.
we were up. So,
So I forgot,
that's okay.
I apologize. So in conclusion, I'm curious if we could direct administration to look at what land is available and just start looking at that.
We certainly could if everyone on the board agreed. We could start with member Landstrom, and I'll get it right this time, apparently. I
Yeah, I'd
apologize.
be in agreement. I'd be curious as to what area we would direct them to look at.
Well, I just want to find out what's available,
Yeah.
you know, in the southern Forest Lake.
Yeah, I think
In my
Forest
church.
Lake and South, and then probably a pretty wide track to look at to start with, and then start comparing property value, accessibility, right? You want to look at the road structure and infrastructure around it and figure out what would make the most sense. Member Corcoran?
Me, I struggle because there's so much available space still in our schools. So, I mean, that would be my first thing, if we're gonna keep our pocket elementaries, because they're very important to the community in the areas that they are, that we wanna capitalize on those, growing those, instead of starting homeschool. That's the way I feel, because when I first started on the board, we had 7,500 students. That's to tell you, that's the number in my head, I've always had in my head. So when I see these low numbers, it's very upsetting to me, because that was a long time ago. And I just know the capability and how much room we have at those elementaries. I don't know as far as the high school, middle school numbers, as far as capacity, what's available and what's able to be, that I'm unclear of. But I do know that there's still a lot of space in those elementaries. And to me, I know how important those are to those communities. So I struggle with wanting to think about doing another school. But I mean, if the whole board is in agreement with that, I mean, I would go along with it just to do exploration, but, you know, for the future. But I just want to say how important it is that those elementaries stay in the communities that they are.
Advertising.
Well, I just feel like the growth, and I know the clerk of Scandia Township, the 5-acre lots, there's not going to be development. And same thing out in Linwood, and I mean, it's kind of coming this way.
Yeah, but we'd have to grab us like we did with Lino. I mean, grab your neighborhood and bust them like we have discussed in the past, is taking communities and areas and taking them to different areas. That's what we've done to kind of fill those schools. So that's just, yeah. Like I say, I'd be willing to address, I mean, look at it if that's what the board decides.
And so you're saying that they did do that in the past? Bust them from other.
Yep, they've taken different developments like your area.
Yeah, it was out to mine.
Yeah, because it didn't, that was a big discussion, because Forest View was not able.
Let's go around and get
Oh,
everyone's
sorry,
opinion.
sorry.
So,
I'm just
Member
rambling.
Tyson.
I'm rambling, sorry.
I haven't seen it for days.
We've been here for a
That's
while.
what that becomes.
Yeah. So in your opinion, Member Tyson, we should direct administration or no?
Yes, I would agree with that. I would be comfortable to know.
We'll go to Member Kenneth.
I think a while back, I heard about the city plan to develop downtown Forest Lake. And after living here for 30 years and putting up with a lot of what we did over that time, I saw that as a real opportunity for the city to grow and to become better than it's ever been. And so, I don't know how long ago it was, but I asked Dr. Massey about that. I said, have we thought about that? Have we thought about like White Bear? I mean, where we might go with this? so that the school district follows the city and we become better than we've ever been before. So yes, I'm for it, absolutely for it. Because I think it's short-sighted maybe on our part to say, let's just wait, to your point. I mean, property values are only going to go up. So I think it's worth the exploration, at least just to see what's out there and see what kind of financial prices we're looking at. I mean, what kind of finances. So yes.
Yeah, number one, I agree with Member Corcoran. I'm 100% committed to our schools like Scandia. I think the problem is that I don't think we're going to see growth there, and we're going to lose students if we try to bus them the 6 miles away. I mean, if it were in the vector of a parent's commute, then I think it'll work. But driving them out to Scandia, I know it's going to. So I personally kind of feel like schools like Scandia that are going to take a long time before residents who I'm the model of. I had kids who went through the school district, you know, and now I'm older. There's a lot of us over there. Until that kind of rotates out, I don't think we're going to see a lot of growth there. So I think for us as a district, we have to figure out how we run a school with a lower student count and do it cost effectively.
Right.
So that we're supporting these communities, because we know how great that is, having these communities with their community school, but we're doing it in an affordable way. Obviously, if you start dropping and dropping and dropping, then you'd have to rethink that. And then to Member Kettle's point, I agree. I think we need to, it's not just that we want to direct the administration to go out and start looking for land. I would rather we directed the administration to start putting a plan together or some options into a plan, and that land would be part of it. And as you're putting together that plan, part of it being figuring out what the land situation is and where we need to go. So it's not just like, hey, let's go buy some land. It's part of this kind of structured thing, which I know everybody's kind of agreeing with. And, you know, and lastly, I just think that we just have to be smart about kind of anticipating growth and, you know, figuring out where the school district is going. And there's just a lot of competition around here. And so we just need to always be on our toes. And I think the thing that really, you have the study and all the competition we have, the thing we need to remember is we're, I think, the best choice for a kid's education in this area. And you know, so we need to keep that in our mind as we're spreading out and you know, as those kids, we want those kids to have the great opportunities that the kids of Scandia or Lino or Wyoming have now. So I think it's important we do this kind of long-term thinking.
Okay, and I basically agree with everybody, but I still want to say we should also look west as well as east and south. So south for sure, but having a list of what land is available can start rounding out what options are available. And like Member Rayfield said, how do we utilize our buildings if they start shrinking? And what other outside of the box, do we put more preschool there? Do we put a community center? I mean, how do we use our buildings effectively? But as Member Peterson said, if he didn't say it first, I would have said land is never a bad investment. Not that the school district should be investing, but as we're looking at a potential economic downturn, that's when land may be the best deal for the next 10 years, is in the next 2. So looking where we could have a strategic decision to capture the rebound growth after that, as people are taking more telecommuting jobs, moving further north, looking for more space. Maybe they only have 2 kids, but they're spreading further away from the cities, and they're still looking for neighborhood schools. So long as our high schools can still take the capacity, having another elementary strategically placed either east or west, however it turns out, would be I think, a very wise decision for 10 years future forward to look back on. And if they're selling land, then again, they've got something else they can figure out what to do with it. So I'm a yes. I'd also like to see west as well as east.
I think the general consensus was we would direct administration to have a more prudent conversation and come up with a long-term plan or strategy toward development and the possibility of acquiring land and what that would look like going forward. Tyson.
I just want to add to Member Rayfield's comment that, yeah, I'm not talking about going out and buying a bunch of land or buying land. I'm talking about starting that process. And my daughters went to Scandia Elementary, so I totally understand that feeling of the hometown schools. That is something that I've always loved about our district. But yeah, cost effectiveness, and like we talked about, this is going to be a long process, and we're starting out with baby steps, but just exploration at this point of what land is available, and maybe there really isn't much. I don't know.
To add to what Member Tyson said, the neighborhood schools being so important, I would really worry about if there was a population surge, having them bust all over the place. That's not a neighborhood school. And so putting it in the pocket of where the people will be, I think is a better strategy for having neighborhoods together, because otherwise they're like, well, I'm going to be on a bus for 20 minutes. I could go 20 minutes in any direction. And so they start looking east, north, south, east, west. So if it's in their school, in their neighborhood, it's more community based.
I think that's a consensus.
And we're past that time.
Yeah. Kind of interrupted in the middle of the presentation there.
No, that was the end of
There's
item,
only one more slide. Are we done?
item 1, 11.1. Now we have 11.2. I told you I didn't prolong this meeting. This one may not be as long or as interesting, but really critical. This one relates to our current operating referendum. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't we just pass that? Why are we talking about this now? Because we don't want to wake up one day and say, we better do something because we're coming to the end of this. We need to be thinking about this now. We aren't in action mode here either, but again, in a workshop fashion, having a conversation and an update on where we're at and how might we begin thinking about planning for the next step. By way of a little bit of background, we passed our current operating referendum in 2018. Generates just over $900 per student. You'll recall from a historical standpoint that we were out in 2017 and failed, put together a community finance working group to study our current financing options, as well as what we might do as we move forward after a failed referendum. This board decided to go out again the next year and ask for more. And we were successful. So the good news is we have an operating referendum. It is a decent operating referendum. We should be grateful to the community for its support. It has allowed us to do many things. As we discussed earlier, we're addressing class sizes. We rebuilt our teaching and learning department, and you had the update in the spring about the first monumental curriculum adoption in over a decade in this district, all because of the support in this community and our ability to rebuild teaching and learning. In fact, teachers spent a lot of their time this week learning that new curriculum, and kids will be engaged in that curriculum starting September 6th. An extremely exciting time for our kids in this district. By way of background, we've seen these charts before. This comes from the Schools for Equity in Education, and you can see the gap between current per pupil funding and where funding would be should the state have kept up with inflation, and that gap is $1,600, $1,605 today. Imagine if the state, which by the way, when they build a budget from one year to the next, does not factor inflation. As they build the next annual budget, they'll build it based on the dollars they give education today, and then consider should there be a 1%, 2%, 2.5% increase to education. And then there's a lot of chatter at the legislature about all the money they gave education when it doesn't even match inflation. So if it was indexed to inflation, we would be receiving today $1,600 more per student than we get today. That would be the case across the state. This slide just illustrates where different communities or school districts are at with respect to their voter-approved operating referendum. Forest Lake is at $986 per student. That changes a bit with how the state factors and calculates per pupil funding and referenda. I think we were approved at 8.25, but that then based on how that adjusts with formula at NBE, that is now generating $986 per pupil. I think the other related conversation ties to this slide. You'll see Forest Lake 2/3 the way down. I know it's hard to read, but 2/3 the way down. You'll see Forest Lake at $967 operating referendum per student without any blue bar next to it. That blue bar is a capital projects referendum, voter approved in each of those communities. So in addition to operating referendum, they've got a capital bond approved for most likely and most often in these school districts for technology. Our current technology expenses are completely funded through some capital dollars and we have repurchase, but generally the general fund. So I put this in front of you to just illustrate that another option that other districts have employed is going to voters, their community, and asking for capital projects referendum. Early in my time in Forest Lake, well over a dozen years ago, there was a capital projects bond in this district. That has expired and then was not renewed since that time. And all we received from a referendum standpoint is the 967. Where are we at with our current referendum? If you look at the 22-23 school year, the 21-22 taxes payable in 23, and so on and so forth across this chart. The last year we will receive dollars on this referendum will be the 25-26 school year. That'll be, well, payable 27, for the 26-27 school year. That's when those dollars would come into play for us, and that's the last year we'll receive those dollars. Essentially, we're halfway through. Keep in mind, as we put this in front of the voters, we indicated then that it was an 8-year referendum, and our plan was to make this work for 8 years. And I would say we're doing a really good job of that. We're hitting on all the promises we made, even though things are tighter than we anticipated from the state. The gap in state funding is only growing larger. And while we knew that that would be the case, it's even tighter today than we anticipated. So the dollars we are receiving on the referendum don't go as far as we had hoped because of the limited funding, frankly, we are receiving from the state. That is not meant to be a criticism or a political statement, it is a fact. So there will be an opportunity for this board to consider and determine at some point in the future, if not near future, on what do we do about it. I don't think it's, certainly not this November, it's too late for that. But then as you go down this chart, there aren't a lot of Novembers yet, or renamings, or renewal. So at some point, we're going to need to have some conversation about when might we go back out to the voters for a renewal or, and/or an increase in the referendum. And maybe, and I would suggest conversation as well about whether or not capital projects fund would make sense as well. Make no mistake, this conversation happens in the midst of high inflation and challenging family budgets. We have to understand that as well. So that's the context we're all familiar with as we have this conversation. I'll turn it to the chair for discussion.
Advertising?
So I want to ask the superintendent is, I think I heard that they're trying to call a special session. So my question is there any hope that there'll be something coming towards the cross subsidy?
Yeah, when they adjourned in May, there was almost $1 billion to $900 million to K-12 for cross subsidy and letters to me. There was a fierce debate in the conference committee. Quite honestly, the chair of from the Senate, Chamberlain, had offered $900 million, and the chair from the House, Gaffney, walked away from it. And they could never come back to terms, and that money is left on the table, and they adjourned without any increase to education. If there's a special session, do they pick that conversation back up, and those are the bills that they consider? I don't know. But there's over 24 state agencies that are now calling for a special session yet this summer.
We can't deny that the cross subsidy is just ballooned. I mean, it's really a challenge.
Any money on cross subsidy is money to the general fund.
Right into the general fund, so.
I would like to express my opinion that I sincerely doubt we'll see a special election in such a contentious election year, but also express my disappointment in the legislature for not doing their job. Could you imagine if the rest of us walked away every year without completing our tasks and just said, well, we'll just let that ride for another year and see what happens? The outrage would be, yeah. So, do your job down there at the Capitol, and the rest of us will be able to do ours a lot better. Anyone else further discussion? Member Luther?
And this is just adding to the pile of discuss, that money's worth less now. Because it is, if they had dispersed it at the end of May, it would be worth more than it is right now. Because every minute it sits, it is devaluing. And that's just the economy at this time. So no matter what happens in January, when they're going to touch it again, it'll almost take the rest of the year to get that done. So I do have one question though. So if we had a voter-approved referendum and then schools are fully funded, are you allowed to give back referendums? So if we went out saying we don't trust that the state will follow through on their promises because they haven't for 10 years, and we get a technology thing passed next November, and then the following year they actually do fully fund schools, is it possible to give back taxes locally because that's local taxes, or is the referendum just for the length of the referendum, no matter what?
I've never considered that reality.
Never happened. That's a pipe dream.
But just to, if someone says, well, you already have my money, now you're gonna double dip, you're like, no, you can give your money back.
I don't directly know the answer.
Okay.
I do think this is great information. I think we've got a little while to ponder yet on, where we have to go. There are a few Novembers left, but definitely something to put on the not too distant radar and say, hey, we've got to be prepared and coming in with this timely so that we don't hit that expiration and be up against the wall looking for renewal.
Yeah, I just wanted to question about the capital projects. So, could we direct, I mean, how would we even know how much we would need to fund technology?
Yeah,
So
we would need a,
A directive to.
yeah, we need an in-depth study of that, of what that might look like, what it would go toward, what's the extent of that, what would go
Yeah, I
toward.
mean, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I think that is really critical to our district. I mean, I would like to at least, I don't know how everybody else feels, but direct administration to at least get a start on that, to see how much we would need, how long we need it, you know,
Put a
what
number
would
on it.
encompass.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, it's
my
such a
question.
vague area that I would need a lot more information.
That's where I was going, but from a different point of view, and
Okay.
that was maybe now versus waiting on both of those, that we move on the capital first, because
Yeah.
it sounds like that's something that we can use and we need right away,
Yeah.
where the referendum can wait a while.
Yeah.
So
agree.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should start exploring it, because
Yeah.
the sooner we may be able to do the capital, I think the better.
I agree.
But I think with the analysis will determine what is needed first, right?
Alex, I would just say, I would be careful about that. You know how voters are with approving money in this area. So if they approve the capital project bond, they're gonna go, we just gave you money last year. Now you're asking for this, asking for more. They don't really understand where these things go. So we don't wanna ask too often, is my opinion.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I would add to that point that part of, if the directive is, let's study this,
Yeah.
part of that could also be how might the referendum play along with or work along with the capital project? Should they be timed?
Yeah, for my part, I think it's obviously good that we're looking at these things, but I think it's a little premature right now. I mean, it's okay to study it, but I don't think that, I don't think we're ready right now to go out for a renewal or a capital bond, but at some point we will have to, because these things are timed, and you don't know what the legislature's gonna do. I mean, all the levies in the world can be eaten up in a single year of 0% increase, right? And so you always have to know what you're facing and what's coming up, so.
And I would, go ahead.
I could say, for technology, I think that as we're talking about growing schools, we have only been talking about growing physical schools, like actual buildings that kids go into, but during COVID, there were a segment of kids that thrived online, and we see from their numbers, there's a large number of children in our community that are choosing homeschool, and I think that includes like online university homeschool, correct?
It would be families who homeschool and use an online.
Yes, but that counts in the homeschool number.
Right, yeah.
Yes,
Of
so,
that homeschool number, a certain percentage of those kids are doing it online.
right, and we've discussed in different ways as we move forward in technology and more parents are telemmuting, that there's more opportunity for kids to be used to, I want to be able to, call in or Zoom in, and there are other schools that are developing online programs as part of their core curriculum. I know we have a portion of that. We have supplemental programs, we have extra courses, we're kind of getting our feet wet, and I'm glad that we had that job already started pre-pandemic. It gave us a big jump on COVID, but not wasting 2 years of beta testing, kind of keeping looking forward. And that's where I would say another idea in the technology would be, are we looking at something bigger than just laptops and smartboards? Are we looking at a bigger idea for the school district? And maybe we don't have to have our modem hanging on the wall.
So I think, if I understand everyone right, we would direct administration to at least investigate what that number would look like. But at this time, and I concur with Member Rayfield, at this time, I'm not interested in renewing a bond or a levy. We told them, we were gonna do this, and I wanna make sure we stick to that. The other thing I wanna remind the public, though, is that 9% inflation impacts us significantly too, as it has impacted every family. We are a large purchaser of goods, right? The markers, the paper, all of those products, the people and the staff that also require pay increases to help them combat the inflation. And we are a people business. We don't sell anything here except the futures. And, that being said, we have to think about how we're gonna manage to balance that budget too. So I think we would direct administration to at least look at what that number would look like and bring that back to the board at a future date. Member Tyson?
I'm curious too, could you do a timeline of how much time there is? You mentioned that there aren't that many Novembers and, how many are there? And is there like 6 or?
That's right there.
Okay, so there's 5? 5? Okay.
And this is
So then 5
So
and
including this year, we're in 22, 23. It'd be, really, it's 4 years.
So it's 4 years. So that,
With this year not being viable.
right.
So 3 more after this.
3 more is the total, 3. Okay. I needed to get that in my head, so that isn't much time. Oh, absolutely. It is. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping.
And an update on the game is 28-20 us.
Yay!
Yeah, Rangers.
That's it.
All right, at this time, I would take a recess so we can clear the room for a closed session. Second.
You could do that?
All those in favor, signify by aye.